leave a clock up there.
29,
Okay.
9:29.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Board of Supervisors only allows people to have 5 minutes to speak, and they have a little time, that's a timer. And Ernest Palin has a little card, I don't know if it's up there now, but it says 1 minute, and he'll hold up when you're, it's like, it's pretty funny to watch people, they have a lot to say, and he's like, 1 minute, 30 seconds. Jay is on. Okay, I would, if you want to start your meeting, you go ahead.
All right. Well, good morning. The Lancaster Wetlands Board meeting for March will come to order. I'll introduce all the players. Brian Barnes is the Lancaster Compliance Officer, along with Hannah Smith. I got that right this time. Jay Woodruff, I think, is with us on Zoom. He is with VMRC, Virginia Marine Resources Council. Glenn Rove is our computer operator. Crystal Way is Crystal is our stenographer today. And on the board, we've got Hapad, Will Toll, Hunter Sled is the alternate. Bruce is with us, and also Andy Ransom. Bruce Julian, that is. My name is Cecil Little. Unfortunately, Edna Revere is out today. She's sick again. I want to remind everybody that this is an internet public meeting and been accessed by interested parties through a Zoom internet connection. But anyone present in this meeting or on the internet who wishes to comment on these items before the board, come forward or speak to Mr. Rowe. You will be heard. I think today we have two older items. We do not have any new items to take action on today. So I'll call the first item. If I find my is David Newcomb. Is anyone here present to address Mr. Newcomb?
Good morning. Roger McKinley, 691 Mill Point Drive, Eastville, Virginia, and I'm here again to represent Mr. Newcomb. Do you all have anything to read before I start my?
No, I think we read it last.
Are you good?
Yeah,
Okay.
it wasn't public. It wasn't published this month in the record. So
Okay.
it's still on the record, public record.
Last month, we presented our original application for a riprap revetment and 3 stone groins, 48 feet. There was some concern from an adjacent property owner about the trapping of sand that those groins would present. So in deference to that, we spoke with the homeowner and the contractor, and what we came up with was a revised drawing, which I hope you all have a copy of in front of you, to do a living shoreline and change the proposed groins to a riprap sill to be filled with beach sand that would tie back into the originally proposed revetment, which is still on the table. So hoping that that would alleviate the concerns that the downstream adjacent property owner had about the groins. The riprap sill, it qualifies as a living shoreline with the sand fill behind. And there may be some planting that occurs, you know, from time to time. We also are proposing to do a small dip in the middle of this thing to kind of create a little scalloped area where the water will come in. We'll still have a little bit of rock there, but it won't be as high as the rest of the sill, to allow for a place for the kids to paddle around in the water and do that sort of thing without having to climb over the rocks. So that's the revision. So hopefully we have dealt with the concerns from the adjacent property owner and actually done a living shoreline, you know, to comply with that requirement. So
Okay.
I'd be glad to answer any questions anyone may have.
Mr. Barnes, do you have any comments?
I sent the revision on to the adjacent property owner who complained last month, Mr. Bergen. He replied back that it looked okay to him as long as it didn't interfere with his property. He felt like this approach was better than the groins. And I just checked with Glenn. Mr. Bergen is not online right now, so I would assume, and he did get our agenda, and I did notice him on what we were going to do as far as continuing this decision today. So,
He had a problem with it last,
yeah, I would take his absence as no longer having an issue
Yeah, he's
like
happy
he had
with it.
last month.
Yeah, Mr. Newcomb actually called him and spoke to him
Okay.
right after the meeting.
All
I
right,
don't know
that's
how he
good.
got his number, but he called him and talked to him, and so I think we're, pretty copacetic there as far as alleviating those concerns. And this will provide the beach that the Newcombs were after with the proposed groins, but it'll just provide it a lot quicker, because we'll provide the sand fill immediately.
okay.
So I'll be glad to answer any questions if y'all have some.
Any comment?
Yep. The one thing I did want to mention while we were, before the board members weigh in at all, Hannah and I will have to get, if the revetment part is approved, we'll have to get with your client on the Bay Act part, because a
That'll
lot
be
of
with the
replanting,
contractor mostly,
there's a lot of trees there.
Oh, I know, yeah.
It's going to be a lot of replanting that would have to
Yeah,
occur.
we had that discussion.
Yeah, and we hadn't gotten into that quite yet, but that'll be something he needs to be prepared for.
And actually, the revetment is landward of mean high water, so technically it's out of your jurisdiction.
Okay. Is Jay Woodruff with us?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Jay.
Have any comments, Jay?
I guess my comment would be, I would concur with Roger that the revetment landward of mean high water, and this is not a beach, this is a non-vegetated wetland. The revetment portion would be outside the board's jurisdiction. The sill that's being proposed at or behind mean low water, it looks like it's, in the plan view drawing on the revision, it would look like it doesn't require a permit from VMRC, would be wholly within the board's jurisdiction, as would the sand fill. Sand being placed on a beach is exempt, but sand being placed on a non-vegetated wetland is not exempt. The only clarification I'd like to make is it really isn't considered a living shoreline without any plantings. The three criteria that make a living shoreline are structure, sand fill, and plants. I don't disagree that this is a better approach to get a little beach area for recreational use and stability of the project or the stability of the bank. But I don't believe we could consider this a living shoreline. It's not that it isn't permissible, it's just doesn't meet all the criteria without adding plantings.
Okay, anyone in the public? There's no one in the public here today. Open up to the board for comments, complaints.
I'd like to ask Brian, do we have some idea what the sill will do to the people on either side based on the flow of the Caratoman?
Anything can happen on any given Sunday, but certainly the sills are generally preferred to groins as far as the sand concerns, as far as stealing sand or interrupting sand. And I think that's why generally, and Jay could probably speak better to that than I could, but generally the Commonwealth is a lot more friendly now to the sills and breakwaters because they are open, and you can see with this sill design, Mr. McKinley has left it open on its sides. I would assume that 200-foot length might be a short enough length that the Army Corps doesn't have critter concerns with being able to get in and out, especially terrapins and things that might get behind it. They have a way to get out. Yeah, that's probably a lesser concern with this structure than a groin totally jumping out there and interrupting sand flow. And hopefully it'll be planted. I know he doesn't show plantings on there, and that's not a requirement because we're not looking at this as a Group 2 living shoreline project like we talked about the other day on site. But certainly I would want to plant it myself to help hold the sand there.
Okay. Any other comments?
I think we got some pictures here, Brian, that we could put up on this side.
Yeah.
While you guys are bringing those pictures up, I would just echo Brian's comments that, being open to littoral, drift of sand up and down the shoreline would likely not cause any problems for any adjacent neighbors. And frankly, he's adding sand to the riverine system. Hopefully, much of it stays at his property on site. But if it moves, it'll move to the benefit of the adjoining property owners on either side. You may, Roger, need to put a gap or a window in that sill. Being 200 feet, I think you have to have a 5-foot gap for every 100 feet, if I recall. But that can be modified relatively easily.
Yeah, I had mentioned, Jay, and it may have been before you signed on, that in the center of this, we're going to put a big dip and allow the water to come in for probably 25-foot section there, so the kids will have a place to play in the water. And I think
I heard you speak to that, and I think that's a great idea, both for access and for critter. But we would likely need to see something both in the plan where you're, I don't call it a door, it's more of a window, like with a sill. It's a sill on a sill, a lowered section, unless it's gonna be completely open. But that, it isn't shown in the project drawings.
Yeah, it was kind of an afterthought after we did
No,
the
I think
revision and
it's a
talked
good
about-
afterthought, and I think actually it's gonna be a requirement, so, the board, should they choose to approve it, but approve it contingent upon receipt of a revised drawing showing that opening, because of the length of it. I think anything over 100 feet, or it's supposed to be for every 100 feet of length, you drop in a minimum of a 5-foot window. So Nancy Davis with the Corps would probably be requiring it. We would require it if the sill was going channelward of low water. But I think it's a good idea. It sounds like you've already come up with it. It just needs to be represented in the plans.
Okay, no problem.
Any other comments?
I have a question for Jay. So Jay, does the commission have jurisdiction over this project?
As shown in the revised drawing dated March 1, 2021, the proposed riprap sill is landward of the mean low water line. It isn't as clear in the section view drawing because there's no slope shown, but the answer would be, this is an NPN for us now that it's not proposed to go channelward of mean low water. No permit necessary.
Any other comments?
So I've got a couple comments. So does this, in your opinion, meet the changes in the code requirements as of last July?
I believe it does. While there is no planting proposed, the other two components of the living shoreline are there. The revetment is landward of your jurisdiction, so isn't even, I don't want to say of concern, it's not really not part of what's going to be approved by the board because it's above the elevation of mean high water. Yeah, I believe it does.
Thank you.
Whether Randy, and as you all may know, I may have already mentioned, I've been mentioning, Tony Watkinson is retiring as of April 1. He's on leave essentially until then. So Randy Owen, the current deputy chief, is now acting chief. and will likely become the chief if he applies for it. And, now he and I will review everything the board does like we've always done. And Randy, I work real closely with him, and we'll see. It may come to pass that we would recommend that the board require some plantings, just like Brian mentioned. Even if you plant, I don't believe that the definition would require that every square inch of sand fill be planted. It's like anything else. If you've got 100, in this case, 200 feet of shoreline, if there is a component that is a living shoreline, then it's a living shoreline. The entire, area doesn't need to be full up with marsh grass to make it a living shoreline. Adding some plants, maybe on either end, and frankly, adding those plants on either end would probably hold the sand fill from drifting off site. But that, that's kind of up to your discretion. And that's a tough question. Does it meet in my opinion, in my personal opinion, yes. I think it gets at what we're all trying to get at. But whether or not it meets it to every criteria of the definition of the living shoreline, and not just an LS2 or an LS1, any living shoreline is plants, is sand, and structure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess if you could click through those pictures, whoever's got them a little bit. Roger, what do you, we've been out there 2 times now.
Okay.
And observed, we've just come out of the 3rd wettest year of rainfall in history.
Right.
Recorded record. And there's definitely, I see areas of old slips. I wouldn't call them slides. Would you grab that Ziploc bag right there?
This one?
Yeah. You can open it up. We pulled that out of the site, and I'm sure you looked at this, but here, I have a concern. We're taking basically a natural system here and building a beach. And even and there's all kinds of seepage. You can even see it in this picture right here of groundwater seeping out, but not overland flow. And a de minimis amount of shoreline. So I'm having a real trouble about what is the real goal of the landowner. I'm presuming that his intent still is to remove all the vegetation on the bank, slope back to 3-to-1.
Yes.
90 feet. And right now, when you come into this property and park, you walk uphill, upslope to the bank. So currently, there's no overland flow. Everything that's happening here is coming down and through. There's about 3 foot of clay cap on this site. Below that is pure white beach sand.
You talking about on the bank itself?
I'm talking about the whole bank. We got a clay cap over, it's 24 to 36 inches, according to what we looked at Tuesday. And then you got sand all the way down.
Okay.
And by taking that slope back about 90 feet at 3-to-1, all of a sudden, we now have overland flow dumping down onto this area that you intend to build the beach on.
Okay. Well,
So let me finish.
sure, absolutely.
My rough calculations say there's 18,000 square feet that are now going to be flowing down to this area we're looking at, overland, in addition to the subsurface flow. And that's about 60,000 cubic feet of water a year, based on a normal year, and about 450,000 gallons a year coming over this unstable sand material. And I'm really concerned that whatever we're trying to accomplish here between these 2 zones of riprap is only going to get buried with the runoff that we've now created overland flow where there is none. So even if we'd plant anything down there, you said there might be plantings, none in the plan, I think they're gonna be buried, because all we've got there is beach sand on that whole big, I call it, looks like a road cut. The neighbor's property looks like an interstate road cut to me, where we've just scalped back and removed all the vegetation, all the trees, and we've now created a situation where this area that we're trying to improve and protect and create a wetland, and I certainly think your revised plans is a big improvement, but everything above this board's jurisdiction and everything that happens on this property, I think is detrimental to the applicant's project. So I've got grave concerns with it.
Have you paid attention to the adjacent property owner's property?
Yes.
Do you see any of what you're talking about happening there?
You aware that he's not in compliance with his permit?
I am not. Well, how is he out of compliance?
Well, I'm not gonna bring that up in this
Okay.
hearing. You can talk to Brian about that later.
Okay, all I'm saying is that once we get above mean high water and we get into upland stabilization, that's a whole nother animal that I believe is outside this board's jurisdiction. Now, it's gonna be between the homeowner and the contractor and the county to make sure that whatever they expose there is gonna be stabilized, just like it is on the adjacent property owner's property. That's all vegetated there. I don't see any rivulets or anything running down the hill towards the riprap revetment that he has at the base of his bank. So I have no reason to believe, either through an upland berm, which would retard any of the upland water from going over the bank, that can be dealt with. And so those are things that I think that Brian, through his land disturbance permit, and the contractor and the homeowner can deal with. But this is pretty standard stuff that we're talking about as far as everything landward of mean high water. We've been grading banks and putting in riprap revetments for 30 years.
I'm aware of that.
So
I'm aware of that.
okay, so I know you have your opinion, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's all I can say.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone on the internet who is available to comment? No comments? I want to clarify one thing. I had some concerns about the encroachment of the revetment into the dunes. Is that,
We're talking about,
I'm
you're
sorry?
not talking about this project, are you?
Yeah.
We're not on the dune.
There's no dune here.
Yeah, that'll
Oh,
be the
I'm
next
sorry.
project.
That's the
yeah.
next
Yeah,
project.
that's the next- yeah, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong one.
I'm sorry.
I'm old, I'm forgiven.
We all are. I'm probably right up there with you.
Is there any other comments?
Well, it's obvious the board has a concern about property that's outside our jurisdiction. Is there anything that, available for us to,
Well, you have,
Make that-
what has been done recently in some other counties where a project or a portion of the project has been out of their jurisdiction, they've just denied that part and said, you know, in this case, if the VMRC engineer is saying that the riprap revetment is not in your jurisdiction, then you could deny that because it's not something you would hear or permit anyway, and then approve the sill, because that's something, obviously, I think everyone seems to be in agreement, or at least there's a consensus that that's a good part of this project. And then the riprap has to be dealt with from a BAG standpoint by county staff.
but I
Because-
think, well, this, our concern goes well beyond the riprap revetment. It goes, you know, back 90 feet.
Correct,
on the
yeah.
land, and what we think that might be the result of possibly setting this up the way Roger sort of has explained it.
Right, and while this board does not hear Bay Act issues like some boards do, I think taking into consideration the adjacent upland land use changes that are a part of the plan submittal are certainly within your consideration, because the project has to be looked at. If we begin to look at projects just in piecemeal, I don't think that's good big picture planning.
Right.
So I think you're okay to consider that. And I think that having those statements that you all have just made on record helps back staff as we have to next grapple with the Bay Act implications on this project. And I'll go on record and say that I think the next door neighbors project was a huge mistake by county staff, and the blame for that is totally on my shoulders. That was done in haste. That was done under extreme pressure by the agent on that project, and I should not have approved that modification the way it was, and the plantings were not followed up on, and there's nothing there now. And that project, some of y'all were here, some of you weren't, began in a similar way. The riprap was further out, was in the intertidal zone. The board had concerns, and the applicant said, well, we'll just pull it back, and then it's Bay Act riprap. And I think we're at a point in this state, really, where that is, VMRC is saying, no, 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 only living shorelines, and people are trying to pull these structures landward and just get away with it through a Bay Act situation. And talking to DEQ, who I answer to on Bay Act matters, they are very unpleased with that. But they don't get in the wheelhouse here to see what's going on. They're aware of what's happening, but as is most things in government, by the time we have to deal with something, we should have dealt with it 2 years before. It's too late. Like I'm dealing with solar and several other issues. The things that should be on the ground now as far as regulations for us to follow, the time to have done them was 5 years ago. So I think what I would like to see as a staff person is something differently done with the Bay Act on this project than what was done next door. We're still working with the next door neighbor, but obviously that bank was completely destroyed and denuded, and it's still not vegetated now. I mean, there's a little tiny bit of sparse vegetation, but as you all saw, in that beach sand and that shrink swell clay, it's a desert. It's a biological desert. Almost nothing will grow. So I think your job is to prevent the despoilation of wetlands, to prevent wetlands from being spoiled. The spoliation can happen through mismanagement. The spoliation can happen from improper adjacent upland manipulation that is not done properly. And I think that's what I hear your concerns are with this project. And so, yeah, so you could approve it as revised, or you could approve the revision for the sill and deny the riprap revetment, and then staff have to deal with the applicant on okay, where will the revetment go now? If you still want a revetment, does it need to be even tighter? Should it be hand laid and leaving the bank above? Those are things to talk about. But if it's not in your jurisdiction, you can't approve it.
So what does the board think?
Or deny it.
Or, yeah, that's right. You would deny it if it's out of your jurisdiction.
Anyone willing to make a?
I guess, to follow up on your comments, Brian, then, so what would you see as a viable, to protect the area that we do have jurisdiction in, to not despoil it, as you pointed out, would it be feasible to strip all the vegetation off the bank and go back to 3-1, so that it matched the neighbor? I mean, is that compliant with the Bay Act?
I'll preface what I'm going to say by saying on the record that the Bay Act is the single most difficult ordinance in law I deal with on a daily basis. The Bay Act was, I know some of the people who were on the Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC, that developed the Bay Act back in the late 80s. It lacks a lot of proper management for resources. And the other thing I'll say is the Bay Act in no way prohibits destroying the 100-foot buffer. It doesn't. people tell me all the time, oh, that person's destroying the 100-foot buffer. So, well, when you read the Bay Act, you're allowed to destroy the 100-foot buffer, but you have to put it back, which is, very rarely do humans do a good job of restoring natural systems, as you're well aware. You've spent your whole career doing that. So that being said, especially around here, we have a huge brain drain as far as landscapers, and we really need forestry professionals to be working on these banks, not landscapers. But that being said, this is going to be a tough sell on the Bay Act part. The way it's drawn here is very extreme compared to the problem. If it was a low bank going back that far and there was no vegetation and there was a huge fetch issue, I could see going back 90 or 100 feet, and that would give us an opportunity to plant lots of wax myrtles and change the approach. On a bank like this, it's going to be tough. It's going to have to be tighter. It's going to have to be 2 to 1 if anything's done. There are places on that bank where it's already stable. It's that base of the bank where the fresh water is bleeding out that's pushing the bank out. If that part alone is covered with riprap, with selective grading in places where it's bad, I think it could be done with much less damage. But
Roger, how would this work be accomplished that you're revising?
It's out of my jurisdiction, bud.
No, I mean, is it landward? Is it,
Oh, absolutely.
it's all coming by land?
Yep.
Okay.
Brian, is there any way that we have any authority to maybe approve, but with some contingencies that?
Could you get closer to the
Overflow.
microphone? We can't hear
that
you out here.
Overflow our authority, or are we sort of hamstrung?
yeah, you're sort of hamstrung. You've got to just look at the application you have before you and the request you have before you. Your concerns are noted, and that'll be backed up by staff with regards to the Bay Act processing of whatever happens next. But I don't think you're able to, as the way your board is now, you're not able to tie up a certain approach with the Bay Act.
Brian or Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is a very, very common, the most common concern that we are now forced to address through the new legislature with the living shorelines. I guess I look at it like I'm not insensitive or uncaring about the buffer, the landward 100 feet behind, landward of the wetlands. But I look at it like the buffer is there because the resource needs protecting. So I think that's something to keep in mind, and certainly your jurisdiction in this case is not the buffer, is the resource, is the tidal wetlands. And, I too have struggled with DEQ. I've been on site where a city staff person in Chesapeake was telling a guy to push his bulkhead out into the wetlands to avoid impacting the buffer. Well, the buffer is there to protect the wetlands. Without the wetlands, there is no buffer. So, it's the cart before the horse. And yes, it's been very difficult. The Bay Act, I don't know that I know that the localities don't get the kind of support from the state that VMRC provides. And I'm not saying we do a great job. I'm just saying at least we tune into meetings and we review your decisions. But the whole save the buffer at all cost is, I think, is a misnomer, because the resource is what's being protected. The buffer is part of that protection. And if you have to impact something, don't impact the resource, impact the buffer. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comment? Anyone willing to take a shot at this?
Could I just say one more thing before
Sure.
you all put? I certainly hear your concerns, and I hear what you're saying, and I think that there are ways that those concerns can be dealt with once they get to the place where they're dealing with the Bay Act and not with the wetlands. We're trying to do our best to save the property for the homeowner, and by putting in the sill, we're creating a beach, which is part of the living shoreline process. So I'm just saying that, knowing Brian and his concerns that he's stated, that he's going to do everything he can to make certain that the upland portion of this project is done correctly. He's got an adjacent property that wasn't done correctly, so he has some
Right.
good guidelines to go by. And I just think that at some point in time, we have to trust their judgment in dealing with intrusions into the 100-foot buffer and how they're dealt with down the road, what kind of vegetation can be planted on the bank. And I think all those things can be concerned and can be addressed when it goes to that stage, but that's not here. This is not the county board of supervisors or the county
Right.
staff dealing with those issues. But I think that what we have presented here is a good project, and I've not seen any issue in the past where a riprap revetment landward of mean high water up against the bank has not been approved. However, in this case, it's not in your jurisdiction, so
Does anyone have a problem with the seal? Is it,
No, given the change that we're going to show a window there in sort of in the middle of the
sure,
sill,
absolutely, no problem
flow
there.
inside. Let me make I propose that we approve the revised submission contingent on revising the drawing to show a window in the sill, and the inclusion of plants, the area between the sill and the revetment.
That's kind of a nebulous statement.
Why is that?
2 plants, is that plenty, or you want 10, or 20, or 40, or 100? Or
Well,
we'd be glad to include some plants, don't get me wrong.
right.
And I think that's part of the overall plan. I didn't include it in this application because I wasn't required to. But we can certainly live with that, but I don't know if you just say plants, that is kind of open to interpretation.
Yeah, generally, the wetland vegetation plantings would be on 18-inch centers.
What?
18-inch centers, some people do them on 12-inch centers. The closer they are together, the quicker they fill the gaps. The spread on Spartina alterniflora is about 12 inches a year, so on 18-inch centers, it's usually financially palatable, because then you do 18 inches, 36, kind of grids, and then pop the plugs in, and they quickly fill with 18-inch centers.
So we could revise my proposal.
Yeah, you could
to include
restate your
planting.
motion to include plantings on 18-inch centers where elevationally appropriate.
We'll take that.
Okay.
Second.
been proposed and seconded? All in favor?
Nope.
Raise your right hand. You have 4 to 1.
Okay.
Opposed to 1. Motion carried.
Okay.
Thank you, Roger.
You're very welcome.
And Roger has the next one also.
I'm gonna make sure, so Bruce's mic is too hot, and yours is too cold, so I wanna make sure.
All right. The next one up is Slavic, if I pronounced it right.
Shaba.
Daniel. State your name for the record, please.
And Brian can pronounce the other guys.
Bikema
Bikema,
is the
there you
adjacent
go.
property owner, yeah. That's how he says it to me, so.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Roger McKinley, 691 Mill Point Drive, Eastville, Virginia. We dealt with a portion of this last month for Dan Chavo, and as it turned out, we had also submitted an application for Matthew Bikema, and it was decided by the board that it was probably best to look at both of these together as one, since they are adjacent to one another and both experiencing the same types of problems. So to help you to kind of remember what this place looks like, I brought some photographs that I took early one morning. Sun had just started coming up. So our original proposal for both of these projects was to install a armor stone, well, it's not exactly a sill, it's more of a revetment, up against the eroding bank that's there, and also to install 2 armor stone breakwaters to supplement the armor stone breakwaters that already exist there on the site. These pictures, except for one, have numbers. If you can look at what's labeled as picture number 0009, that gives you a really awesome look at what has happened to this property in the last year or so. He's lost probably 25 or 30 feet of his upland where there were bushes and shrubs and trees. This is the picture I'm talking about right here. And there's also another picture that pretty well shows that as well, and that's picture number 3. But, so what we're trying to do is to install the breakwaters in a position where, in this picture right here, that doesn't have a number, but has a stake over in the corner, that's one of the stakes for the proposed breakwater. And I'd have to get my drawings out to remember the distances that we're dealing with here. So we have 2 proposed breakwaters, and we have 2 proposed revetments up against this eroding scarp. And I guess my big point that I'd like to make is that looking at this first photograph, 0009, I mean, I can see where the dune is, but where we're proposing to put this rock is not on the dune, it's on the beach. The dune is behind it, and last time we met, what I heard from Brian and the board was you can either put the protection in front of it or you can put it behind it. And in this case, what we're proposing to do is put it in front of it. And I think once the breakwaters are constructed, then maybe he can bring in some sand and fill in over top of these defects that have been created by that awesome storm. The problem all originated, as you can see from this picture, the existing offshore breakwaters, or otherwise known as gap breakwaters, the ones that are farthest offshore were constructed too far apart to be effective. And it has allowed a tremendous amount of wave action to come in here against the shoreline, getting closer and closer to these 2 applicants' homes. In this picture right here, you'll see another breakwater that's over to the right, and that was constructed by Mr. Shabo at his expense, because the ones that were already offshore, can you pull those up, Brian?
No,
You
when
didn't
you
put 'em on.
emailed them to me,
Okay.
the only one that was on there was this picture.
All right, so we have that breakwater that was constructed halfway between the shore and the original breakwaters, and Mr. Bikema over to the left, which I don't have it in my picture, he's done the same thing. He's constructed another breakwater to try to save this area of shoreline here in front of their houses. So our proposal is to put a armor stone revetment up against the eroding scarp, which is shown in photograph number 9. There's a good amount of grass growing there. We can stay away from the grass, but you'll see how close it is to the mean high water mark. That's not a dune, that's just.
I'm sorry, which picture are you looking at?
0009,
This one,
9?
yeah.
that's one right here.
I got it, but.
Okay. So you see how close the eroding scarp is to where the rack line is for the mean high water mark, And we still, don't address the part that he already lost in that last storm, which is 25 more feet. So that's what we're asking for. And we have 2 access roads that have been constructed some years ago when these armor stone revetments were constructed. So the access roads are already there to gain, with a small piece of equipment, to get this stone out there to where it can be placed and put. So I have open for questions.
I'll ask my question again
Okay,
in the
sir.
right venue, but I'm not seeing exactly on this picture the difference between the definition of what the dunes are and what you're proposing.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you walk from the upland across the dune, it's pretty well defined. And when you get to the edge of where this vegetation is, I think that's the edge of the dune. And from there, it's the beach. It's the shoreline. I mean, high tide comes up to within 4 or 5 feet of that. So
Okay.
I don't think the dune extends any further than where this area of vegetation is, and it may not even extend that far.
Okay.
Because if you look at that picture, and I've got another picture here, let's see, that you all had a paper copy of, that would be image number 10. That's just a beach. And there are flat areas where that grass is growing that really don't represent the characteristics of a dune, which would be a large hump. I mean, that's flat there where the grass is growing. So anyway, what we were trying to do is to stay channelward of what could be interpreted as a dune, and we're interpreting it as the edge of a vegetated wetland, and try to, first of all, stop it from getting any further more landward, and then second, to add the revetments out in front as a really stalwart protection. Those are armor stone, 500 to 1,500 pound stones. And the one on the left that Mr. Bykema constructed and the one on the right that Matthew has constructed, both of those have worked to the extent that there's still this gap there that needs to be filled in by the 2 proposed breakwaters. So,
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, we still have pretty strong concerns about Beaches and Dunes Act with that positioning. When you get into the Beaches and Dunes ordinance, you're really looking to probably only permit the gap breakwater. He's talking about kind of a sill approach out here versus something right up against the base of the dunes. I think putting a revetment there against the base of the dune is going to be, and I hear Roger's concerns that in some places the dune is flattened or not existent, but in general it's present across most of the reach. You're going to choke it up with revetment there. You're not going to allow the dune to move. It might build up in the back. It might completely end up covering the revetment. Who knows? But my interpretation of the ordinance, the Beaches and Dunes ordinance, is that you're not allowed to put a hard structure over top of it like that. The only exception to that is where we allowed Daniel Lang a little further down to place mats. And he did that behind the dune, and they are temporary, and they're supposed to be removed after a certain period of time.
Do you feel like
Yeah.
the revetment is encroaching on the dunes?
I think so. I think it's well, and if it's not, it's on the beach, and we still don't allow riprap on a beach either. The riprap has to be either in the form of a breakwater or a sill out in front, well off of the beach, or well behind it.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
not easy when you're sitting in one of these houses looking at 35 miles of open water, but
Yeah.
that was present before they built.
Okay. Jay Woodruff, any comments, questions?
Yes, sir, thank you. Again, Brian is right on it. The Beaches and Dunes ordinance basically says, stay off the beach, stay off the dune. A dune is a beach is a dune. You know, they're different physiographically and you know, shape and form, but they're regulated as if one is the other. The offshore structure with possibly some more sand being brought in, with maybe that sand being stabilized with sand fencing, would be another option. But, you know, we're splitting hairs by saying it's in front of the dune, it's on the beach. Well, it's on the beach and it's a little bit into the dune. It's all in the, you know, in the jurisdiction of your board. And again, you know, this, yes, is a very exposed area, and they chose to live there, and, you know, it doesn't really allow for manipulation to what I want, you know, based on what I built. It's, you know, the jurisdiction has always been, you know, those areas that need to be protected, and not protected with stone or timber walls or, you know, whatever hard structure, but protected by offshore structures with sand fill and vegetation, dune vegetation in this case. So, you know, I can't say whether or not we would review it. I will say that there's a project currently on the commission agenda for this month that was a beach and dune almost directly across due east of this location on the bay side of the eastern shore, where we're telling them they've got to pull it back behind the jurisdiction of the beach and dune or go offshore. And, you know, the local wetland board in Accomack approved it, and we're reviewing that decision because it was approved in a jurisdictional area. I strive for consistency, but I don't handle Accomack County. But beaches and dunes are afforded protection under the law, and Brian, you know, hit the nail right on the head with his comments.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Anyone in the public? There's no one in the public. How about the internet connection?
Okay.
No comment. Open up to the board for comment.
For my clarification, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're just considering Shivo's project, correct?
Yes, yeah, Bikema would be, sorry about
Later.
that, next month.
Okay, thank you.
Any
Why
board
is
member?
that, Brian? You said last month, the board actually said they would consider both projects together at the same time, which is why we delayed action on the Shivo project in order to incorporate the Bikema project in that to be dealt with all at one time. That's what the board said.
Okay. I don't recall that. I do remember that getting the consensus that this project was tabled in order not to deny the whole thing and to give you the opportunity to consider, and especially we discussed that we thought one of the gap breakwaters would benefit by being much wider. I remember that being the main crux of the tabling. I think the board feels that same way, that it would give you a chance to revise the project by removing the part that was in the beaches and dunes. But our compromise was, hey, we do feel like you do need more protection out where it is permissible, and go ahead and widen those gap breakwaters out a lot. And I will remind you, and I remind citizens of this almost daily, is the double-edged sword of the Beaches and Dunes Act is that nourishing a beach in Lancaster County is extremely liberal. No permit required, as long as you comply with tiger beetle season and all the other little caveats to beach nourishment. And I've told these property owners that in this HOA, I would have a program where every year I would bring in as much as $10,000 a year or more of beach sand in this reach and just do it every year no matter what, and really nourish this system. It was never properly nourished to begin with. I saw the site when they finished the project.
Right.
They only put enough sand out just to build the breakwaters and never nourished it, and that's why it's been a failure.
Let me ask the board a question. If you look at photograph number 0003, you'll see one of my stakes. What would be the consideration of the board? Now, I guess we're just dealing with Mr. Chavez' project. If we did a riprap sill, freestanding, in between the edge of what you're calling the dune and the backside of the proposed breakwater. And fill that area with sand. Because we're talking about a long area where the breakwaters are to where the edge of the dune is. But if we had a riprap sill, freestanding, far enough off from where the edge of the dune is, as you're calling it, that we could backfill that with sand up against the eroding marsh grass that's there.
Do you have enough area there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you'll look at, if you'll look at this photograph that has no number,
Yeah,
you'll see how much,
I was looking at this one.
yeah, how much distance we have.
But I'm
The breakwater that Mr. Chavo installed some years ago has worked really well. The only problem is it just wasn't long enough to cover up this section that has gotten highly eroded. But if we did the breakwater, which would extend up to the edge of the one that's already there on both ends, because Bikema has one of those as well, we do that breakwater there, and then do a riprap sill, we're talking about Dan Chavo's project now, off from where the dune is, but between there, that edge and the back of the breakwater.
And put sand fill behind that.
And put sand fill behind that up to where the grass is, and then revegetate that area.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I've done several of these where I actually borrow a little bit of the existing grass that's there, and I plant it in the newly created beach area. I take a post hole digger, I dig a hole, I go over here and I get a post hole digger full of marsh grass and I put it in that hole, and I can put those out there, and because they're not just a little sprig, they're an area that's 4 inches in diameter. They do really, really well. I've done several of those. So what would you consider if we were to revise this, look at it again next month, both of them together, and propose a riprap sill far enough off from the edge of the dune that we have enough room to fill it in with beach sand and replant it?
Well, I think it's a good idea. What does the board think? I think that keeps us out of a gray legal area too.
I'm sorry,
A
Cecil.
gray legal area.
Oh, okay.
I got a couple questions. Go ahead. Because I got confused there. I'm looking at last month's minutes to just recall what we agreed to do. And it says, Mr. McKinley said he's working with the adjacent landowner to the north, and since the projects would be installed simultaneously, he asked that it would be prudent to come back to the Wetland Board with 2 applications for complete consideration as one project.
That was my remembrance.
It was at a future date. It wasn't particularly this month. Mr. Barnes replied that the county has always encouraged shoreline owners to work together. That's where I got confused, because I don't have any paperwork on a second landowner here.
Yeah, we just got it, and that's the other problem, and the buck stops with me. That was, staff has to manage these boards and commissions and try to manage, both our workflow and the workflow of the boards. And I knew that these 2 items, they're taking as long as some of our meetings with 4 or 5 items on the agenda. I also have the legal requirement, when I got that Bikema project in front of me, the letters really need to be out well in advance of 21 days before the meeting, and the timeline was just not working out to be able to get Bikema legally. And there again, Jay can tell you all about, the commission can revoke our decision if we did not meet that adjacent property owner acknowledgement timeframe, and that's got to go to the other property owners on the other side. Everything's got to be arranged. It just wasn't happening.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I understand all that. This Bikema application was in your hands during the February hearing, which is why.
Yeah, we had not reviewed it at
I
that time.
understand. And why we
Yeah.
had proposed to deal with both of them at the same time, which I certainly agreed with. And in addition to what other reasons we may have had, we tabled it until we could get back together. I don't mind tabling it again until the April meeting, if there's gonna be one.
There is.
And try to deal with them both at the same time. But I would like your thoughts on the idea of doing the riprap sill, and with beach sand fill behind it, right up to the edge of the grass, and then revegetate that whole area.
Okay, let me understand this, since I don't have paperwork in front of me, Brian, but what exactly are the components that Roger's requesting are in our jurisdiction? It seems like we usually get reminded multiple times every meeting from both VMRC and every consultant what our jurisdiction is. But what exactly, the offshore breakwaters are not. The sills, what is it that is in our purview?
I don't see a drawing for what Mr. McKinley is talking about now with the sill, but it sounds to me when you talk about a sill with sand and plantings, you're talking about a Group 2 living shoreline project that would not be in your jurisdiction anyway. Also, as Mr. Little just alluded to, we're in a gray legal area because now we're getting close to that 30-day mark since you heard this item. And under the code, you have to make a decision within 30 days. That's to keep people out of legal limbo. Once we, as he said, you know, it's a burden just to get us, and everybody's overwhelmed right now with work, to get these guys in front of a hearing. The law says, okay, now that you've done it, you've got to make a decision within 30 days. So that day is today, unfortunately. I would advise you guys as your staff person to make a decision one way or the other on this project today. If Mr. McKinley is not, and his client are not happy with that decision and they want to come back with a sill, that sill sounds an awful lot to me like a Group 2 living shoreline project that I or Hannah would draft a letter saying no permit required and get Mr. Little or Ms. Revere or one of you guys to sign it. And then Mr. McKinley would still have what his client needs, and we would not be in trouble with the Beaches and Dunes Act.
Okay.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
This is Jay Woodward again. While a sill with fill and plants would be a living shoreline, the fetch is too great in this condition to call it a living shoreline general permit. So you all would still have to authorize that formally. The other thing I guess I would mention is, you know, the agent has just stated again, they would be willing to table a decision and not force your decision today to meet the conditions of code. We've had any number of projects that are tabled indefinitely. And until the applicant/agent forces the issue, if you will, or holds your feet to the fire on that timely review, then you're still well within your, your legal authority to do that. You're not stepping outside. You're not, you are complying with the law. Where there's a problem is the 30-day issue. And again, it's 30 days. There's actually 60 days upon receipt of a complete application. Mr. McKinley is offering some modifications, which would indicate to me that the application is kind of incomplete at this point, because there's some changes that he would like to make with the board's input and the board's encouragement, and he's willing to put off a decision by the board. It's when the agent and applicant are not willing to wait any longer that forces a decision. And if you all don't take that decision or don't make that decision, VMRC would review your lack of action and ultimately just send it right back anyway. It would be remanded back, and that just adds another month. So, to work together with each individual property owner working with the other one, to have the property owners working with the board, getting to Bruce's question, what's in your jurisdiction? As currently proposed, I see, Roger, well, the original plan view revetment and breakwater, page 4, Roger's original drawing, page 4, received back in November by us. That proposed breakwater is right there on the mean low water line. So half of it would be within your jurisdiction, half of it would be our jurisdiction. If he comes forward with a sill type structure or extending or widening existing breakwaters, it would just be a matter of where that rock is going. If all rock is channeled over to low water, with the revision that comes in with Roger's sill that he's speaking of, then, you may remove the revetment, move the sill/breakwater offshore of low water. Sand and plantings is exempt under the ordinance, the dunes ordinance, so you wouldn't have to take an action at all. It would just be VMRC and the Corps. It was my understanding there was going to be a meeting down on site. Did the Corps and/or VIMS go to this site with you all? Do you know?
Jay, that meeting was set up between the Corps and myself, the contractor, and Brian. And for some reason, we were waiting on the disposition of the Fish and Wildlife Service there. So we held off on doing that on-site meeting until we heard something from Fish and Wildlife, which we have not heard yet.
That might be a good, not to interrupt, but that might be a good opportunity to get everybody back down there again. I couldn't make that last scheduled meeting, but again, I applaud your board. I applaud all the boards in the Commonwealth that I've worked with, because there is a desire to work together. I mean, it's not us against them. It's all of us together, and it wouldn't do anybody any good to come up with a plan that you guys can agree to, that VMRC can agree to, that the Corps is going to throw out. So by tabling, that allows some more time to maybe get another on-site down there with some new staked alignments. But as proposed on both this Shivo and the Boikema project, a revetment in a jurisdictional beach dune environment is not something that is generally permissible.
Right.
But the breakwater would be.
Correct. So eliminate the revetment and come back with a breakwater or a sill. I have heard Scott Hardaway call a big sill a little breakwater is a brill. It's a breakwater sill. It's a brill. Whatever you call it, what you may, depending on where that jurisdiction is, and if it's just channelward of low water, then it would take it out of your jurisdiction entirely, both projects.
From here to there, if I can't.
Thank you, Jay.
A new sill channel where the mean low water, or else it'd be on the other side of the breakwater. It could be in between. Okay.
But I think what we want to see is for you to request it. That
Right.
way,
I understand.
So,
it's
Roger and I had some conversation on this project, and as we stood there on this site, Roger and I'm amazed how much sand the improperly or let's say stingy involvement of those offshore breakwaters were.
Right.
But where they did work, I can't believe in 18 years that much sand is filled in behind those breakwaters. But when you stand right in front of this critical spot in the dune,
Yeah.
and you look northeast, there is a giant hole
Absolutely.
looking all the way to Smith Island, I
Yeah.
think. And to me, the holes between those offshores are greater than the length of the breakwaters.
Yeah, it was
So-
improperly constructed.
So, to me, that's where he's getting hammered by that wave action as we see things. So I just want to make that comment and thank you for the conversation.
And I think most of the success in this area that you see are because of the two new breakwaters that both homeowners have installed. The one on the upstream side Kima, I mean, that is awesome. I mean, that's like Virginia Beach. And it's just like there's this one spot right there that has just taken a hit. I would be more than happy to ask the board to continue this project, since we're just dealing with Shabo, until next month, to where we could hear them both at the same time. My only concern, and I would really like to be able to do the sill, the freestanding sill. I can't get it channelward to mean low water. It's gonna have to be between the breakwater that's proposed and the revetment that's gonna be removed. There's only like 20 or 30 feet in that I have in there, but mean low water is right through the middle of the proposed breakwater. So I can't get the new sill channelward to mean low water, but I can get it in between the proposed breakwater and the dune. If I can get it far enough off from the edge of the dune to satisfy the Beaches and Dunes Act, then I think we've got a winner there. And
I
I'd be
think
more
so.
than happy to ask you to continue it and look at them both together next month, if we can agree on that.
I don't think we can predetermine a
Okay.
decision,
But
Roger.
just the thought.
But I do think to reinforce what Brian said, that this board's not in a mode of approving anything in violation of county or state code. And so if we can reach that understanding, I think it's a good idea to get the resource agencies out there, get
Okay.
everybody on the same page.
Yeah, I was trying to do that, and it just didn't work out.
Pretty
We may
cats.
have an answer from Fish and Wildlife Service. There's some question about the grain size of the sand, whether it's suitable habitat for the northeastern beach tiger beetle. I've been on some of those reviews with Dr. Nisley from the University of Richmond. So anyway,
So go ahead, you want to request
I would
a
love to.
table?
I would, hold on one second.
I'll make that motion. I'll make a motion to honor Roger's request to table the action until a future date.
Okay. Hopefully next month, but
You have a second?
Second.
All in favor, aye? Raise your right hand. Motion carried.
Yeah, it will be next month unless there's a snowstorm, which could
Come on,
happen in
Brian.
April.
Don't talk like that.
Thanks, Brian.
Good.
Way to go, Brian.
Could happen.
Don't say that S word. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
And if you could sign that as well.
All right. A couple other things I think needs to be addressed, and if Brian could maybe give us a little progress on the two violations, if you have information.
Yeah, the Windmill Point one is kind of sitting there because frankly, it's going back to court to hear whether or not the tax sale proceeds. So I've been a little leery to push that on to, back to you guys. I also haven't heard from the marina manager. I may try to reach out to him next week when I have a chance and see if he's ready to come up with, you know, a plan to address the way the rock they put down without a permit is constructed, but I'll let you know more about that in April.
Okay. All right. And VRMC, Jay, can you talk a minute about the draft wetlands guideline?
What I can say is the draft guidelines are up on our website. I actually haven't even gone to them yet. I have already heard from others who have gone on to it. There's going to be a lot of pushback and a lot of concerns and comments, but that's sort of, you know, the process. That's, you know, like a straw man, you put it out there and, you know, the time to comment and raise concerns is now. I think it's scheduled to, tentatively scheduled to come to the commission in May or maybe April. But, you know, I would encourage the board members and the staff folks to take a look at it with a highlighter or a red pen or something. And, you know, where you have issues, whether it be, you know, your ability to enforce, knowing, you know, the limitations of not the limitations of staff, but, you guys are overworked, and here it comes again, more stuff's being thrown at you. So I would encourage you all to take a look at it, a critical look at it, knowing that, this is the time, and I can't really say off the record, but I will say personally, I would not be surprised if at some point in the not so distant future, a project that back in the day would have been considered to be a reasonable impact to wetlands gets denied by some board somewhere because it's not a living shoreline, and that somebody that brought the project forward is either financially or politically connected, and VMRC probably would be the recipient of that lawsuit on a denial, because whatever project you guys, not you guys, if a wetland board denied a project and that applicant appealed the denial to the commission and the commission upheld the denial, then the next step is, going against the Commonwealth, going against our agency, bringing lawsuit against our agency for takings, if you will. I hate to use that word, but
Yeah.
that's how people understand it. If you don't allow me to do what I want to do on my property to protect it, then you're denying me my right, as a landowner to protect my property. That equates to a taking, and we'll see you in court. I think the intent of the living shoreline legislation was good, but once you mandate it and make it law and don't allow a whole lot of wiggle room and alternative options, then, it's like backing anybody into a corner. And we'll see how it plays out. I don't know, but, VMRC is the, messenger, and we're going to get shot during this whole process, but that's how the process is, and it will play out. But I fully intended to spend almost a whole day or a big chunk of time printing the thing out. I'm not good reading it online. I'm going to print it out and I'm going to look at it with my little marker, and I'm going to go, whoa, this is going to be a problem, and I'm not sure how we're going to be able to enforce that, or gee, that sounds a little over the top. I don't know that our staff is going to, form a we'll ultimately form a recommendation, and it may be along the lines of, before you commission is the guidelines. We recommend you adopt them, but maybe not, this part of it. But, your board is not the only board in the state that's dealing with this. Every board is going to deal with this. So I'm hopeful that all the other boards will start raising comments and concerns that will end up in the final draft that the commission will adopt. And again, it's guidance. What the guidelines that are adopted are just like the wetland guidelines that exist today, that were drafted way back when, that have been revised a few times. It doesn't carry the force of law, but it's going to be used unilateral. It's going to be used widely by all the boards. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Was there 2 violations?
The one you're done with, that's got to go on. I don't know if VMRC's done anything with it, with the guy that put the gravel on his shoreline. I'm going to put that in the county attorney's hands at the Board of Supervisors meeting next time I see him.
All right.
I haven't heard anything from that individual at all, so we'll see what we can do with it with the county attorney working on it.
Was it October or November meeting we voted to advance these violations?
Yeah, it was December,
December meeting?
I think so. Yeah,
I think you guys have dealt with it.
we've
and-
dealt with it,
and
yeah,
now
we've done all we
it-
can do with it.
It moves up.
Well,
Yeah, that's been a combination of me having to have the time, because the file is that thick. I've got to arrange everything in chronological order, so it makes sense to the attorney. He hasn't, when he gets it, he hasn't seen it
Is
at
the
all.
county attorney?
County attorney, yeah. So we've got to spend the money ourselves to try to get resolution on that.
Okay,
We'll see what happens.
okay. Government moves slow.
Regarding the comments on the new guidelines, I've gotten comments from Hunter, and we have to have these finalized for Edna's signature by the end of the month and submitted. So if there's other comments from anybody on the board, I'd like to incorporate those. You could pen and ink change them to me. You've all got copies of it. I've got that draft, so I'd like to get these for Edna's signature here in the next week so we can get those submitted to chairman of the commission.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
How about can I have a motion to approve the minutes of February 11th?
So move.
Second?
Second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried. Roger, have some other business?
Brian just talked about dollars. I would just like to remind you of my request from a month or so ago about considering a compensation fund, which would allow for monetary contribution to that fund by a homeowner who is proposing to.
Right, this is a follow-up from your last meeting's comment.
Thank you.
That's the in lieu fee.
In lieu,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Brian, what would that require in ordinance or action by the Board of Supervisors, or how do you see that?
That's a good
implementation to
question.
occur?
It would likely require an ordinance amendment, just to add it to our wetlands ordinance. I would rather see that. It could be a policy that the board adopts in the form of a memo from the board, county administrator, but having it in ordinance would be cleaner. One argument to hold off on that is this guidelines situation. We've already kind of done a draft ordinance amendment to our wetlands ordinance that is kind of stalled due to, remember, I took it to the planning commission, but PMRC had some issues with it, and as it turned out later that night, we didn't have a quorum with the planning commission anyway, so it just didn't get heard. So it's kind of sitting there, and now with the draft recommendations, I think it's just, I told Tony Watkinson in an email a couple weeks ago that we will be the last county in the Commonwealth to update our wetlands ordinance and make it consistent with the Living Shorelines Guidelines, just because I was the first one to jump out there and make the changes, and feel a little stung about that. So I think we'll let everybody else do theirs. The guys, the big dogs. Norfolk has attorneys on staff doing nothing but wetland stuff. We'll let them make those changes that work and that are nice and easy, and then we won't plagiarize, but we will borrow heavily from those versions.
Well, it's certainly disappointing that since, we've had the knowledge that this code change was going to come over a year now, and it happened about, 8 months ago, no, 10 months ago, and we're now in proposed guidelines. I guess we'll get the finals maybe a year after passage by the General Assembly, but it's disappointing that no model ordinance was provided along, and that'll be part of our comments. It'll also be interesting to see, the old saying about a law does not become a law until it goes to court. And interesting in these guidelines where various codes in Virginia are now being linked to living shorelines that do not have any statutory standing. And those are the cases you're going to lose in court when a policy or a guideline has no statutory basis. I got told by a judge one day when I was holding my policy book up on my guideline, federal judge, he called my policy and guideline a comic book. and I was crushed, but unless you have a regulation, which usually carries the weight of the law, but policies and handbooks and guidelines are not a legal binding document.
Yeah, and one of the problems I've learned, especially going through the solar ordeal for the last year and a half of my life, I've learned, I've sat right in this room with a man who looked right at me and said, I wrote every state law about solar, utility scale solar facilities I wrote. And he is 100% paid for by the solar industry. And that's, Virginia's kind of unique in that regard, is that special interest groups get to write their own laws. And that's not done even in some of the more old South corrupt states, if you will. There's a definite wall of separation. Laws are written by lawmakers and groups and staff people. And I think that's what's happened with the living shorelines that Jay alluded to, and that may be a fatal flaw, is that certain groups were allowed to write this and push it forward without understanding the Bay Act issues we talked about, without understanding what it's like to sit in this room and really try to figure out, because owning waterfront property is not a rational experience. And the people who've written all this stuff have no idea what Jay goes through, what Hannah and I go through, what you guys go through, what Roger goes through to try to wrestle with coastal management in general. So it's going to be interesting.
Okay, any other comments?
Can I add, I just want to add one thing in closing. After listening to Bruce mention the judge's comment about his comic book, this is not really related, but I was subpoenaed to show up in circuit court in Chesapeake to arbitrate two landowners who were getting together trying to decide where their pier was going to be, back and forth. And so I'm standing there in my suit, and the two property owners are going back and forth. Well, Judge, we met with Mr. Woodward, and Mr. Woodward got us, and we all agreed, and this is why we're here today. The judge looked me right in the eye, and he says, "Why do I care what Mr. Woodward has to say?" Thanks, Judge. Can I go home now? I mean, I'm only here because you subpoenaed me. But yeah, it's a little gut punch sometimes.
I hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Raise your right hand if you agree.
Right.
Meeting adjourned at 10:56.
Thank you, guys. April 8th.
Thank you all. I'll try to be in person.
Thank you, Jay.